Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the managing director, as Dilip said, of HPL Additives. We're a company based predominantly out of North India with our plants in Haryana and Punjab. And we're an additives manufacturer. We make antioxidants and flowing agents, azo initiators, and so on. Today I'm going to touch briefly upon additives for biodegradable additives for plastics. It's a hot topic these days. Every second or third day one hears about the negative press that plastics are getting, the various bans in different states for the use of plastics and the negative press that we're seeing largely across in our country. Just a little brief snapshot on what the numbers look like. In 2015, the total production of plastics was 325 or 322 million tons, of which in 2018, India will account for only 5%. So we're still, it's a good number, but we're still small as compared to global production capacities. The per capita consumption, the United States leads the way, followed by Europe, China, Brazil, and India still stands way down in that hierarchy of consumption because for various reasons. And if you look at the application areas and how they are broken up globally, packaging accounts for 35%. So it's the largest area where we see consumption of plastics. And again, this varies from developed countries to developing countries because of various developments in each of these countries and usages and so on. But by and large, you're looking at about a 35% of the total plastics used go towards packaging. Packaging, as you know, the various resin types, polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, PVC. And the per capita consumption in plastics is, again, India is, if you just take 3 countries in Asia, China, just the other way around, China is at 19 kgs, and India is at 4.3, and Taiwan is at 6. Now, while there seems to be this narrative about plastics being bad and plastics being banned and why we should be not using plastics in the packaging industry, and poly bags and plastic bags under certain microns have been banned in various states, it still goes to prove that it's probably one of the most transformational products or transformational materials that was ever invented. And the reason, why we all use plastics is known to all of us, and strength, durability, transparency, lightweight, cost, easy to process, low cost in manufacturing. So plastics, by and large, has changed the world as we see it today. I think it hasn't been detrimental to the environment. It's actually been good for the environment if you look at it from another perspective. And if you look at packaging material and carry bags versus plastic bags versus paper bags, plastic carry bags generate 60% less greenhouse gases. They consume 40% less energy during production and generate 80% less solid waste. Paper generates more air pollutants and pollutes the waterways, and water pollution significantly higher. And while both can be recycled, it takes 90% less energy to recycle 1 kg of plastic as opposed to 1 kg of paper. And transportation of plastic versus transportation of paper, the numbers don't add up. But yet, we look at plastic bags being bad and plastic bags being not very good for the environment. So when you look at plastic bags, the decomposition is, if they're not treated or they don't degrade, which they won't under normal circumstances, could last 500 years, 1,000 years, and be around forever. There are issues on health and safety. But the big issue here, especially in our Indian context, is disposal. We see that plastic bags enter the marine and aquatic populations. We see most of the plastic waste being thrown into the oceans. They litter the landscape and find ways into the parks, beaches, streets, and our countryside when you're driving past our cities, whether it's the urban cities or it's still in the hinterland and the villages and so on. When you're driving past a highway, all you see is plastic littered across in the fields. Animals eat the plastics. They die a painful and slow death because of this ingestion. And it just completely destroys our municipal systems in our cities because it's impossible to control and contain the disposal of plastics. And then we have certain ways that we are enforcing here to mitigate the environmental impact. We talk about gauge reduction, so the bags are lighter and finer. We put taxation and cess, recycling, discarded plastic, incineration is still far away. Composting, landfilling, and we keep hearing about these landfills which go 25 floors high in the middle of cities, and they collapse and kill people, and there's constant objection to a lot of that happening. And there are bioplastics. People have, there've been this huge move about plastics coming, bioplastics coming, but then they come with their own limitations, and they come with their own quagmires in terms of cost of processing and the environmental impact of deforestation and so on and so forth. Also, the cost of processing some of those bioplastics is a little higher than coming from conventional fuel. We see that conventional plastics, they do not decompose in landfills, okay? It requires either mechanical action or it needs composting. Composting facilities in our country are scarce, okay? And plastics will only compost under composting conditions. Incineration of plastics is something that is still in its nascent stage. Like I just earlier said, bioplastics come with a more negative carbon footprint than they do with a positive footprint. And while recycling of plastics is preferred over degradation to encourage resource management, it can only take place if it's collected. So our collection systems and disposal systems here are still not up to speed compared to the more developed nations where there is a systematic collection and disposal methodology. Now here, the legislations that we have in India, you have states like Maharashtra, Goa, West Bengal, Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, where they restrict the use of plastics between 30 and 70 micron. In Uttarakhand and Chandigarh and Jammu and Kashmir, they are completely banned. And the last to this addition was when the NGT, through its order on the 10th of August, they said there will be complete prohibition of plastic bags, carry bags made with less than 50 micron and are non-compostable. So any bag which is non-compostable, which is less than 50 micron, cannot be used. There's a fine imposed on sellers and users and manufacturers. Now, compostability, compostable plastic, first of all, it's a different plastic altogether. It biodegrades only under industrial composting, in industrial composting units. It cannot be recycled with conventional plastic. It doesn't degrade in the open environment. It's heavier, it's thicker, and it requires more cost in transportation, and it is more expensive. It is 2 or 3 times more expensive than the conventional plastic. In India, if you see, all our solid and plastic waste is picked up by waste collectors. And it's the collection and disposal that is the continued problem in the country, because they're single-use, multi-layer packets, and they're abandoned. The waste collectors don't have a systematic way to dispose them off. So when they collect them from various places in various pockets, they go and throw them on the roadside, or they go and throw them in abandoned areas. Now, degradation of plastics, yeah? So we look at the entire carbon bond when it's broken down. We have oxidation, so you have conventional polyolefin-type plastics with pro-oxidants react with atmospheric oxygen to insert oxygen into the polymer backbone and break into smaller polar molecules as a consequence of a process known as oxidation, which we all know. And the biodegradation, the smaller molecules are then amenable to biodegradation by naturally occurring microorganisms with conversion to carbon dioxide, water, and cell biomass degradation. Now, typically, plastic manufacturers limit this process by adding antioxidants to their resins in order so that the plastic can be thermally processed into finished products without oxidation, which is what we produce antioxidants, and so that's the objective of that antioxidant. If you look at the oxo-biodegradation, the first step in oxo-biodegradation, it's a two-stage process, okay. The first one is through, just a minute. It happens with, in the presence of oxygen, ultraviolet, and mechanical stress. So it degrades, and then after that, it biodegrades in the presence of microorganisms. And this process continues until the material is biodegraded into nothing more than carbon dioxide, water, and biomass. So what oxo-biodegradable additives do is a two-stage process, and it then renders the plastic converted into a biomass. Okay. And again, these are proprietary compound additives and marketed to plastic converters. Is their ability to match formulations. So these can be tailor-made based on formulations and applications and so on, okay? And they act as catalysts in speeding up the normal reactions of oxidative degradation, with the overall process increased up to orders of magnitude and factors of 10, okay? Now, the applications typically for the oxo-biodegradable additives are anything that goes into packaging, polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, okay? And of course, the time of degradation could vary from 1 to 3 years, depending on the applications and the objectives that you need to derive out of those applications, and also the dosage of the oxo-biodegradable additive that goes in. While it's important to point out that these oxo-biodegradable additives are not harmful. They don't contain any heavy metals, no lead, arsenic, mercury, cadmium, selenium, barium, chromium, nickel. So, and they're not carcinogenic, okay? So they're safe to add into plastic, which comes in contact with food contact. They're manufactured, by and large, they have absolutely no contaminants when they are manufactured. Exposure levels are maintained during manufacturing, and the concentration of airborne metal ions is also very, very low. And there are the FDA approved and also approved under the EFSA. Tests in various laboratories across the world have proven that the plastics with oxo-biodegradable additives degrade a lot quicker, a lot more efficiently, and actually physically turn into a biomass, okay, through the two-stage process, and more efficiently than the plastics that do not have these additives in them. So you have oxo-biodegradable additives showed complete embrittlement after 96 hours in the UV apparatus, and drastic degradation after 90 days outdoors, and complete fragmentation after 36 days in an oven in 70. So there are various standards under which these are tested. Now, landfills, if you look around, you'll see all these landfills, but typically, plastics do not degrade in a landfill. They just add to the landfill unless they have oxo-biodegradable additives in them. and this study was done in Quebec and Canada as well, that the resulting compost had no impact on the germination or growth of sensitive plants, which is important because the chemicals don't render the landfills useless for future use. So there are no chemicals that would render the soil after the landfill is abandoned, that it becomes worthless for anything to germinate there. While when we say when we promote the use of oxo-biodegradable additives, we're not promoting littering here. We're not saying that you can now go about throwing your plastic bags wherever you deem fit, okay? But what we are saying is it's an effective way to deal with one of the biggest problems that we are facing in this part of the world, and that is the contamination of the environment by the poor disposal and collection of plastics. Also, since plastics typically have a specific gravity less than water, they'll typically float on the surface. So when they're floating on the surface, they have exposure to UV light and oxygen and so on. So even plastics that are disposed and they find their way in waterways and in the oceans, they're still, with the presence of oxo-biodegradable, they will degrade. And also we've seen tests performed in the United States, Canada, Germany, that there is no negative impact of these chemicals in the biomass that's a result of this, and can be used very, very easily with the compost that you can derive. And of course, the use of oxo-biodegradable additives doesn't render the plastics unrecyclable, okay? And what we are seeing today in the news, which is very relevant, is that there's this constant move towards banning plastics, and we believe that the ban of plastics will probably take us back in terms of development many years, because I think what plastic has done for the planet is unmeasurable in lots of ways. So you'll see lots of the news floating around that, NGD bans dumping waste and so on and so forth. So while this is an area of concern for all of us, there are solutions. And we were discussing with various associations, in the plastics associations, about actually trying to explain that it's not the plastics that's causing a problem. It's the disposal of plastics and the collection of plastics that's causing a real problem to the environment. So there are ways to mitigate some of these negative impacts of plastic in the environment, and we do believe that oxo-biodegradable additives is one of them, and is certainly a good move in the direction of trying to make a difference to the environment, and a contribution towards hopefully what the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan has been. And we think that the way forward is not limiting plastics or their use, but the way forward is understanding what plastics can do for you and what you can do for plastics. And with that, I end my little narrative here. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Hello, I am Dipanjan from HPCL Mittal Energy Limited. So I have a question that while using this oxo-biodegradable additives, do they have any antagonistic effect on the conventional antioxidants which we add?
No, they work in conjunction with those.
Okay, so is there any also synergy between this oxo-biodegradable additives and the conventional antioxidants?
Well, they do the opposite thing.
But
it works in conjunction. There is a synergy that comes out of the blend, out of the compound.
So do they have any negative impact on the mechanical properties of the polymers?
No, it depends on what you're expecting and depends on what you're expecting out of the application. Because, if you want your plastic bag, for example, some companies want plastic bags not to degrade because they want to use them as branding media. Okay? So a lot of the companies will not add any oxo biodegradable because that's their brand strategy. And that's their media strategy. Their whole marketing strategy is, so if you look at the high-end brands, they will never want a Gucci or a Louis Vuitton, or these people would never want they would want their bags to be used over and over again. So they will never add this. So yes, of course, it depends what your objectives are, but a Safeway, a Tesco, your milk pouches, which have no real reuse, okay, and they don't, and the companies don't want the bags to stay for more than 6 months, and they don't want to continue to use them because they don't use them as branding tools. They will very consciously make sure that they have oxo biodegradable. And then we have a lot of relationships with a lot of companies, they're part of their CSR. They see it, a lot of companies see it as part of their CSR, that listen, automotive companies that every single automotive part that's made is wrapped in plastic because it has grease and oil to protect it during transportation and storage. And they see it as their part of their CSR, that they've actually got plastic for all nuts and bolts and small parts, which is oxo biodegradable. So yeah, it depends on what the objectives are.
Thank you, sir.